In early October 2018, the world was greeted to a black, goopy mess. No, not what comes out of me on a nightly basis, although I should probably go to a hospital for that. No, instead they were greeted with the movie Venom, Sony's newest live-action symbiote that is willing to kill and eat all who oppose him. This Sony creation, which starred Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock, received mixed reviews to say the least. I personally thought the movie had a lot of potential and visually had a lot going for it. Sure, some of the CGI looked weird, but I believe that made the entire movie that much more enjoyable. I mean, the final scene where you see half of Eddie's face and half of Venom's face is the shot a kid like me dreams about seeing in a live-action movie. However, even though this was his first solo movie, this isn't actually the first time we've ever seen Venom on the big screen. No, that was back in 2007 with the now infamous Spider-Man 3. And sure, I'm not gonna say that Topher Grace's overall look and performance was particularly what I would think of when thinking of the name Eddie Brock, but I still believe Spider-Man 3's version of him is quite creative and a good idea for the character portrayal. When taking into account the world Sam Raimi had built for us, perhaps this representation of Venom was amazing for that world. Hey guys, my name is DJ, and before we get into this conversation, I want to point out that this is not a video comparing the two movies. I personally believe that the two movies in question aren't all amazing. However, that's not what this topic of discussion is about. I'm here because I want to talk to you today about why Spider-Man 3's representation of Venom was actually pretty amazing. Not whether or not Spider-Man 3 is a better overall movie to Venom, which is a task too daunting for even myself. Now that being said, I will admit that Tom Hardy looks exactly like Eddie Brock in a real-life adaptation. Eddie Brock is much more of a tough, kick-ass, and muscular American man, while Topher Grace is much more of a skinny guy who, let's just say, is none of those things. He's not particularly the built athlete that Eddie Brock should be. You know, Eddie Brock is a superstar athlete who is built to bully and torment his victims. But even though the Spider-Man trilogy does have its flaws, particularly in the final part of that trilogy, I will say that it doesn't particularly have a bad Venom. Venom's portrayal, to me, is not a flaw in that trilogy. Sure, maybe there were too many characters in Spider-Man 3. Oh, okay. There were too many characters in Spider-Man 3. But what they did with Venom in Spider-Man 3 was pretty interesting. Eddie Brock didn't have to be this big, hulking man because, well, in that movie, Eddie Brock opposes Peter Parker in a different way. He wasn't the typical high school jock that bullied Peter. No, instead, Topher Grace's Eddie Brock opposed him because of how similar the two characters are. Think about it. Peter Parker was the skinny nerd who got picked on and was told he wasn't good enough. He was always bullied by people physically bigger than him. Hell, they even both work as photographers for the Daily Bugle. In this universe, Eddie Brock and Peter Parker are merely two halves of the same coin. The only difference between the two halves, however, is completely life-altering. Peter, unlike Eddie Brock, had someone to help guide him. He had someone to help push him, feeding him bits of information and life advice that would mold Peter Parker into a responsible and respectable young man. Peter Parker, unlike Eddie Brock, had an Uncle Ben. He had his teachings, he had his lessons. Peter knew something that would literally shape him to his very core. With great power comes great responsibility. Now, why exactly is that such a difference between the two characters? Well, it's literally shown throughout the entire movie. In Spider-Man 3, we watch as the Venom symbiote starts morphing the personality of Peter Parker. We watch as he goes from this blue-collar, nerdy, and likable version of himself into this aggressive, self-centered, and downright asshole version of himself. The symbiote gives us a glimpse of Peter Parker, a glimpse of Spider-Man without Uncle Ben. The teachings of Uncle Ben that molded him into the person that he would eventually become, the person that knew that that great power did come with great responsibility. This Venom symbiote showed us a Spider-Man, showed us a Peter Parker that did not have those teachings, those lessons of his uncle. And when Peter saw who he was becoming, he decided to change it. He took a look at himself in the mirror after accidentally hitting MJ, knowing that this is not who he is. He realized the words, the lessons taught by Uncle Ben were slipping away from him with this Venom symbiote. So he decided to take it off. But that's where Eddie Brock's Venom came into effect. The key difference between the two, the lack of Uncle Ben in Eddie's life, is what creates such an interesting and amazing version of Venom. Instead of Eddie and Peter being opposed to one another physically, they instead opposed one another psychologically. Peter knew that the Venom symbiote was changing him, and he realized that he wasn't being changed for the better. He realized that that was a bad thing. But since Eddie didn't have that great power comes great responsibility lesson in him, he just decided to consume the rage. He decided to consume the power that came with the Venom. So in the end, that's why Spider-Man 3's version of Venom, even though it is a bit different, is amazing. Even though it might not be true to the comics or whatever you want to say, Sam Raimi's vision of Venom is still interesting, even though their differences are not physical. Eddie Brock and Peter Parker. In Spider-Man 3, they are merely two halves of the same coin. Anyways, that's gonna have to be the end of this video here. Did you guys like it? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to see more of my over-analytic and dorky content, why not check out this video here? And while you're staring at this outro screen, why not click this little subscribe button? Anyways, hope you have a good day, and I'll catch you later. Bye-bye! Yo.